Thanks, Barbara. It's a landmark settlement struck between the U.S. government, most U.S. states, and the banks. The deal puts an end to a series of investigations into alleged fraudulent lending practices that led to the 2008 financial crisis. Patty Colhane reports.
Good afternoon, everybody.
President Barack Obama made sure his face was front and center for the news. 5 of the nation's biggest banks agreeing to pay $26 billion, much of it to help struggling homeowners.
Under the terms of this settlement, America's biggest banks, banks that were rescued by taxpayer dollars, will be required to right these wrongs.
The banks are accused of doing many things wrong when it comes to the mortgage mess, but this settlement specifically refers to paperwork. When the average American gets a mortgage, they have to fill out about this many forms. When it goes into foreclosure, many more. What the banks are accused of doing is not reading it, not having the right oversight, and that's illegal. It'll cost them $26 billion.
It is the largest joint federal-state civil settlement in the history of this nation.
There is some debate about how much this deal will really help. 750,000 people who lost their homes to foreclosure will get about $2,000 each, but more than 4 million homes have been foreclosed on in the last 5 years. 1 million homeowners will receive assistance with their loan amounts reduced or refinanced, but that's just a fraction of those underwater, meaning they owe more than their homes are worth. There are 12.5 million U.S. households in that boat. So this is unlikely to fix the overall issue, but it proves one thing has changed: the president's position on accountability and the recession.
A lot of that stuff wasn't necessarily illegal, it was just immoral.
Turns out, in this case, it was illegal. And in this election year, officials say those responsible are just beginning to pay the price for it. Patty Colhane, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined now by Jordan Estevao. He's the director of the National People's Actions Bank Accountability Campaign, a national effort to mobilize communities in the fight to hold banks accountable. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me.
So we have the settlement, $26 billion. How far does it go to addressing the abuses that were perpetrated by the banks, in some cases crimes that were committed by banks?
Well, it certainly doesn't go far enough. The good news embedded in this is that there's an acknowledgement finally that principal reduction, reducing people's mortgage payments to fair market value, is a big part of the solution. That's how you're going to keep families in their homes. That's how we're going to stabilize the housing market, stabilize the economy. However, $25 billion, or $26 billion as it may be, is a very small drop in a very large bucket. Collectively, the 5 big banks, the mortgages that they hold are about $300 and some odd billion underwater. So $25 billion doesn't really come close to addressing the real scope of the problem, and it certainly isn't enough to act as a real deterrent for the banks to commit this kind of behavior in the future. So,
and then, of course, we have the numbers of people who are in trouble, who have problems. That's 12.5 billion, as
exactly right.
12.5 million, as our reporter just said.
That's right. So these people are right now essentially paying over the odds, paying more for their houses than those houses are worth, and that goes into bank coffers where it does nothing for the real economy. If you make those folks whole, bring their payments in line with what their homes are actually worth, then the extra money goes into the economy, creates jobs, and so on. So we're calling on the Obama administration to see this through. In his State of the Union address, he announced a new investigation, a new phase of this, new task force headed by Eric Schneiderman, the New York Attorney General. And we hope that President Obama sees that as a very serious undertaking and that it needs to deliver relief for homeowners in the range of hundreds of billions of dollars rather than another $25 billion.
Okay, one other very important issue. Does this agreement let the banks off the hook insofar as further legal action can be taken? I mean, is it a case now where the investigations stop, the banks say, well, we didn't commit any crimes, but we agree to hand over this money, that's it?
So we've been pushing very hard for there to be, and this has been a big sticking point. The banks fought tooth and nail to get immunity for other crimes beyond just the robo-signing that was addressed by this lawsuit. And as far as we can tell, that has not really happened. So there's still a lot of leeway for the federal government, for states' attorneys general, and individuals for that matter, to sue servicers and banks. And we just really hope that that certainly the Obama administration and the attorneys general really do that.
So the investigation can continue. You know, initially there was some reluctance on the part of the attorneys general in New York and California to sign off on this deal. They've now signed off on it. Have their concerns been met?
A big part of their concerns, as I understand it, was one, that the amounts of money be distributed fairly amongst the states, and then second, that there not be a broad release of claims that would stop them from doing a deeper investigation into securities fraud, which is what this next stage focuses on.
Jordan Estevao, thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me.